I want to tell my friend Ann Coulter, I haven't talked to in a month. Ann, I'm going to read your column out loud, and I'm going to educate you. Or I should say re-educate you. I've got to help you. You've become a Romney zombie, and I want you to get back to the ability to reason and to think for yourself. It's painful to have to do this publicly, but you are publicly doing this to yourself. And while I've largely kept quiet about it, you're everywhere flailing around, making really ridiculous comments. Your column today, which is intended to be provocative, so I'll bite, because I assume you want me to bite, is entitled 3 Cheers for Romneycare. I guess you think that by driving into the teeth of the storm, you will somehow reduce the storm. I'm afraid not. I've just read your piece during the break, and I can break it into a million pieces. And unfortunately, since you're all over the place promoting this idea, and so many of the reporters and hosts who interview you just sit there with their tongues hanging out and don't challenge you, I will address this column that you've written, not to personally attack you in any respect, but to address what you've written. Now, because this program is broken up into segments, and your column obviously is not, given the different formats, I will have to deal with it a little at a time. Now, you start off your column, dear, with, if only the Democrats had decided to socialize the food industry or housing, Romneycare would probably still be viewed as a massive triumph for conservative free market principles as it was at the time. No, it wasn't. Mitt Romney said that one of his collaborators, if not the most important collaborator, was Ted Kennedy. Ted Kennedy didn't view it as a triumph for conservative free market principles. Oh, and we'll get to the Heritage Foundation in a moment, which has since renounced it. It's not as if we had a beautifully functioning free market in the health care until Governor Romney came along and wrecked it by requiring that Massachusetts residents purchase their own health care, she writes. I don't think we have a perfectly functioning free market in anything that we do, ladies and gentlemen. As a matter of fact, the free market accepts the fact that there are many failures and there are many imperfect people. That's why it's so brilliant. But that's not a justification for further destroying it, now is it? In 2007, when Romneycare became law, the federal government alone was already picking up the tab for 45.4% of all health care expenditures in the country. So, what does that have to do with anything? Did all the other states think, hey, that's a great idea, individual mandates? Let's all copy Romneycare. Have any of them copied Romneycare? There's so much more here. Until Obamacare, mandatory private health insurance was considered the free market alternative to the Democrats' piecemeal socialization of the entire medical industry. And she wants to tell us about Reason and the Heritage Foundation. I'll get back to this. We'll break it down piece by piece. I want to help Ann. Let me continue with the Ann Coulter piece, 3 Cheers for Romneycare. I wish Romney would say that at the debates, but he doesn't. So she writes, in November 2004, for example, Libertarian Ronald Bailey praised mandated private health insurance in Reason magazine, saying that it could preserve and extend the advantages of a free market with a minimal amount of coercion. Apparently he was wrong, wasn't he, Ann? A leading conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, helped design Romneycare, and its healthcare analyst Bob Moffett flew to Boston for the bill signing. But Heritage has since renounced the individual mandate. That's not in your column, Ann. Romneycare was also supported by Regina Herzlinger. Really? How fascinating. Harvard Business School professor and health policy analyst for the conservative Manhattan Institute. Herzlinger praised Romneycare for making consumers, not business or government, the primary purchasers of health care. Really? But you left somebody out, Dan. Jonathan Gruber. Why did you leave Jonathan Gruber out? Because he's a leftist? Because Jonathan Gruber had the biggest role in designing Romneycare of anybody. And he was one of the main architects of Obamacare. And he has said publicly that there's little difference between the two. So why would you ignore Jonathan Gruber? And I'm holding a piece right here. I know we lawyers, we know how to do our research. We Google, we use LexisNexis. We can come up with all kinds of stuff. January 14, 2010, the Wall Street Journal. The press corps is agonizing, or claims to be agonizing, over the news of Jonathan Gruber's conflict of interest. This is a separate issue. But here's the point. The MIT economist has been among the foremost promoters of Obamacare. And it goes on. Gruber is a health economist, former Clinton Treasury hand, as well as an architect of Mitt Romney's 2006 health plan in Massachusetts that so closely resembles Obamacare. That's the Wall Street Journal. Somehow Mr. Gruber didn't make it into Ann's piece. But why does it matter what any of these people and groups thought? We're thinking human beings. We can figure this out. Mr. Bailey may have written what Mr. Bailey wrote. Heritage may have said what Heritage said. The Manhattan Institute may have done what the Manhattan Institute, but last time I checked, Ann, the only one who bit was Mitt Romney. Maybe there are other governors out there. Maybe there are other Republican governors out there. Maybe there's other conservative governors out there who've adopted the equivalent of Romneycare. If so, they're awfully quiet, aren't they? But let's not forget Mr. Gruber by omission, if we're making a list of names, because he's architect number one. Then Ann goes on, the bill passed by 154-2 in the Massachusetts House and unanimously 37-0 in the Massachusetts Senate, including the vote of Senator Scott Brown, who won Ted Kennedy's seat in the U.S. Senate in January 2010 by pledging to be the 41st vote against Obamacare. All that tells us is Scott Brown has principles that are firmly committed. Tells me his feet are firmly planted in the air. So now we're going to cite Scott Brown, who voted for Romneycare and opposes Obamacare. You know why that is? It's because his constituents are turning. The more people are involved in Romneycare, the less they like it. But once again, what does that have to do with anything? Particularly if you're a constitutionalist. The fact that you have a majority, an overwhelming majority, who supports something that violates private property rights and empowers a government, whatever government it is, to interfere with your private medical decisions, and you bet Romneycare does. Who cares how many people vote for it? Is that a principled position? No. No, it's not. Temporary politicians imposing their will on individuals. The founders rejected all of that. And they keep saying Romneycare is constitutional under the Massachusetts Constitution. I haven't read the Massachusetts Constitution. I do know that John Adams had a lot to do with writing it. I really question that. Or maybe the courts find this constitutional, but that's a separate matter, isn't it? But let's move on. Ann Coulter goes on in her piece, 3 Cheers for Romneycare, but because both Obamacare and Romneycare concern the same general topic, health care, and can be nicknamed politician's name plus care, Romney's health care bill is suddenly perceived as virtually the same thing as the widely detested Obamacare. How about Romneycare Gate? Well, you can mock it, but the architect that you left off your list, Ann, so the readers of your column wouldn't know his existence, he said they're virtually the same. And in fundamental respects, they are virtually the same, aren't they? She goes on, as the New York Times put it, Mr. Romney's bellicose opposition to Obamacare is an almost comical contradiction to his support for the same idea in Massachusetts when he was governor there. She says this is like saying state school choice plans are the same idea as the Department of Education. No, it's not. It's like saying it's the same mindset, that government knows best, and because government can pass laws, they're going to pass laws, and that there's no respect for the circle of liberty, private property rights, private industry. That's what it's saying. One difference between the health care bills is that Romneycare is constitutional, Obamacare is not. Well, under the federal Constitution, I suppose that's the same. That's true. So what? I don't believe people are arguing that Romneycare is unconstitutional under the federal Constitution, or not even under the state Constitution for that matter. So who cares? Romney cares because that's where he says, well, I would not impose Romneycare on the whole nation. I believe in the 10th Amendment. But you don't believe in the individual. That's the problem. You believe in utopianism. You believe in these impracticable, if not impossible, fantasies. State-run health care. And it's a disaster. As several conservative think tanks have pointed out, which I discussed last week, and which are not in this article. Only the think tanks that support Ann's position are in this article. I'll go on. As Rick St. Torm has pointed out, Coulter writes, states can enact all sorts of laws, including laws banning contraception, without violating the Constitution. That document places strict limits on what Congress can do, not what the states can do. Romney, incidentally, has always said his plan would be a bad idea nationally. Well, good for him. It's a bad idea, period. She says the only reason the individual mandate has become a malediction is because the legal argument against Obamacare is that Congress has no constitutional authority to force citizens to buy a particular product. She says the legal briefs opposing Obamacare argue that someone sitting at home, minding his own business, is not engaged in commerce among the several states, and therefore Congress has no authority under the Commerce Clause to force people to buy insurance. Well, our brief says that, and it says more. There's absolutely nothing in American history, including the examples Ann has given, that compels two private parties, an individual and a business, to enter into a private contract for goods or services the individual may not want and that the business may not want to give. And none of the examples provided by Ann disputes that. In fact, she's making arguments that the federal government, the Obama administration, is making in the Supreme Court if she'll read their briefs. She says no one is claiming that the Constitution gives each person an unalienable right not to buy insurance. No one is claiming that the Constitution gives each person an unalienable. Now, what we're saying is the unalienable rights thing is that people should be free to pursue their own interests, to be unmolested by government as much as possible. And this is one area where it's possible to be left alone because the vast majority of states have not adopted Romneycare or its equivalent. Have they? And what is the Constitution gives each person an unalienable right not to buy insurance? The Constitution, unalienable right, the unalienable rights in the Declaration, the Constitution is there to limit what the government can do, the federal government in particular. I'm not even sure why she's mixing the Constitution with the state issues. She thinks she's on to something. She's on to nothing. It goes on. States have been forcing people to do things from the beginning of the Republic. Drilling for the militia. Is that entering into a private contract that you don't want to enter into? No. Taking blood tests before marriage. Paying for public schools. Registering property titles and waiting in line for 6 hours at the Department of... Where are the examples? There must be tons of them, right? That individuals are compelled by the government to enter into private contracts with other private entities against their will. Where is that? Every one of these she's talking about involves government. Drilling for the militia, taking blood tests before marriage, paying for public schools, registering property titles, and waiting in line for 6 hours at the DMV in order to drive. We're not talking about the Social Security system here, which is a direct tax. We're not talking about the Medicare system here, which is a direct tax. What we're talking about is Congress specifically not laying a direct tax, but compelling individuals to enter into private contracts with other private entities, which has never been done, has not been done, and is not included in the list that my friend Ann Coulter provides either. Now, I have to take a little break, and then I'm going to finish the Ann Coulter column entitled 3 Cheers for Romneycare, line by line, word by word, because I've had about enough of it. Are we supposed to throw conservatism out the window altogether to defend Mitt Romney? It's one thing to defend the man, but it's another thing to reject your own principles. And this is the problem we're going to have down the road. I'm just explaining it to you, folks. You don't have to agree with me.